The humiliation. Commander Sarah Chen watched the Zexian diplomat from across the negotiation table, her face maintaining the practiced neutrality that had become second nature in these meetings. The alien's four eyes blinked in their unsynchronized pattern, a sign of amusement that she had learned to recognize over the past 3 years of Earth's integration into the galactic community. "You must understand, Commander," the Zexian said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat English, "that certain classifications are simply scientific fact. Your species falls into Category 3 intelligence. The term ape is merely the closest approximation in your language." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't allow the reaction to spread to the rest of her face. Behind her, Admiral Jackson shifted his weight, the only sign of his simmering anger. "Scientific fact based on what metrics, Ambassador Kestik?" Sarah asked. "Humans have mastered nuclear fusion, achieved faster-than-light travel independently, and developed quantum computing." The Zexian's upper limbs performed their characteristic dismissive wave. "Rudimentary achievements, and quite recent. Your species spent most of its history throwing spears and building primitive shelters. The Zexian Empire had mapped 1,000 galaxies before your kind had even discovered electricity." It was the same conversation they'd been having since first contact, when the massive Zexian vessels had appeared in Earth's orbit without warning, announcing themselves as representatives of the dominant civilization in this arm of the galaxy. Their technology had been so advanced that Earth's combined military forces hadn't even registered as a threat. "Regardless of your classification system," Admiral Jackson cut in, his deep voice carrying across the room, "the mining operations in Africa and South America exceed the parameters outlined in our agreement. Your harvesters are destroying critical ecosystems." All four of the Zexians' eyes narrowed. "The agreement grants us access to resources necessary for imperial expansion. If your leadership finds the terms unsatisfactory, perhaps you should have negotiated more effectively." The implied insult was clear. Earth's governments, faced with technology centuries beyond their comprehension, had capitulated to most of the Zexian demands. What choice did they have? The aliens had demonstrated their power by casually redirecting an asteroid that would have struck Mars, altering its course with energy emissions that human instruments couldn't even properly measure. "We request a review of the territorial limitations," Sarah pressed, sliding forward a data pad with documented violations, "and compensation for the communities displaced by your recent expansions." The Zexian didn't even glance at the pad. "I will convey your concerns to the Imperial Council, but I must remind you that Category 3 species are granted representation only as a courtesy. Your opinions carry no binding weight." After the ambassador left, Sarah remained in the conference room, staring out the window at the Zexian embassy, a towering structure of impossible architecture that seemed to defy gravity, its crystalline surfaces refracting sunlight into prismatic patterns across the Geneva skyline. "They're not just mining resources," she said quietly. "They're preparing for something bigger." Jackson nodded grimly. "Intelligence confirms it. The extraction pattern doesn't match simple resource gathering. They're clearing areas, creating infrastructure. Colonization," Sarah said, the word heavy in her mouth. "We think so. The Zexians view Earth as they would any other resource-rich world inhabited by a lesser species. Their history with otherworlds suggests they'll gradually displace us to reservations once they've established sufficient presence." Sarah turned to face the Admiral. "Then we need to accelerate the Phoenix Protocol." The Phoenix Protocol had begun as a desperate contingency plan, a way for humanity to preserve something of itself if the Zexians decided that Earth would be more valuable without its indigenous population. But over time, it had evolved into something more ambitious. Deep beneath the lunar surface, hidden from Zexian observation posts, scientists and engineers from every nation worked tirelessly to understand and reverse engineer alien technology from whatever scraps they could salvage. Progress had been slow, but there had been breakthroughs. Dr. Kagoa made a discovery. Jackson said, engaging the room's security protocols to prevent eavesdropping. Something about the way Zexian ships manipulate gravimetric fields. She thinks they've overlooked an application. What kind of application? The kind that might give us a fighting chance. 2 days later, Sarah stood in the cavernous underground laboratory on Luna Base Alpha, watching as Dr. Miyuki Kagawa explained her findings to the assembled military and scientific leadership of the Phoenix Protocol. The Zexians use a form of gravitational manipulation for their FTL drives, Dr. Kagawa explained, her holographic displays showing complex equations and field models. But they've optimized it solely for transportation. They're technologically stagnant. They haven't had to innovate in millennia because no species has challenged them. And you found a way to weaponize it? Asked General Rodriguez. Dr. Kagawa's expression tightened. Not exactly. But I discovered that the same principles could be applied to affect stellar bodies, specifically to trigger specific types of solar activity. The implication hung in the air for a moment before Sarah voiced it. You're saying we could target their sun? Theoretically, Kagawa confirmed. A precisely calibrated gravimetric pulse could induce a massive coronal ejection directed at their homeworld. Not enough to destroy the star, but enough to devastate their planet's infrastructure and defensive systems. That's extreme, Sarah said, though part of her felt a grim satisfaction at the possibility. It's survival, Jackson countered. We've intercepted enough of their communications to know they consider Earth a temporary shared space. Their long-term plans classify us as relocatable fauna. Sarah had seen the translated documents. The Zexians had a 1,000-year plan to gradually concentrate humans into smaller and smaller territories, while they transformed Earth to better suit Zexian biology. They didn't consider it genocide, just efficient resource management. How long would it take to develop this technology? Sarah asked. With current resources, 3 years at minimum, Kagawa replied. And we'd need more data on Zexian celestial mechanics to properly calibrate it. Then we need to accelerate intelligence gathering, Sarah decided. And we need to find a way to test the technology without alerting them. As the meeting continued, Sarah's thoughts drifted to her grandfather, who had been among the first casualties of the Zexian arrival. He'd been a historian in Beijing when the initial Zexian survey teams had cordoned off parts of the city for cultural assessment. When he protested their removal of artifacts from a museum, they had simply stunned him with some kind of mural disruptor. He'd never regained consciousness, becoming one of thousands of regrettable incidents during the integration period. The Zexians had dismissed these deaths as unfortunate misunderstandings, comparing them to the accidental stepping on anthills. They hadn't even understood why humans were upset. Sarah refocused on the meeting as Jackson outlined their next steps. The Phoenix Protocol would need to expand its operations, taking greater risks to acquire the necessary technology and intelligence. They would need to place operatives in Zexian facilities, intercept more communications, and somehow test Dr. Kagawa's theories without detection. And they would need to do it all while continuing the charade of being the compliant, primitive species that the Zexians expected. As the meeting concluded, Sarah lingered behind with Dr. Kagawa, examining the holographic model of the Zexian home system. Do you ever wonder if we're becoming what we hate? Sarah asked quietly, planning to devastate their entire civilization. Kagawa's eyes reflected the glowing hologram as she responded. The difference is, we don't see them as insects. We recognize them as intelligent beings making a choice to destroy us. We're offering them the chance to recognize the same about us. Sarah nodded slowly. Let's make sure we give them that chance clearly, before we have to take more drastic measures. But as she spoke the words, she wondered if the Zexians were even capable of seeing humans as equals. Their empire had spent thousands of years classifying and exploiting lesser species. Recognizing humanity as peers would undermine their entire worldview. We may have to show them our worth in terms they understand, she murmured, more to herself than to Kagawa. Power is the only language that transcends species. The scientist gave her a long look before responding. Then let's make sure our first words in that language are unforgettable. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the covered human vessel Prometheus, watching as it approached the Zexian mining outpost on Europa. The ship represented humanity's first true leap forward, a craft built with hybridized technology, incorporating Zexian principles, but pushing them in directions the aliens had never explored. The Prometheus moved silently through space, its gravimetric signature masked to appear as nothing more than background fluctuations. If Dr. Kagoa's theories were correct, the Zexians wouldn't detect them until they were already docked. "This is our first real test," Admiral Jackson said, joining her at the viewport. "If we can infiltrate this facility, extract their stellar data, and leave undetected, it proves the concept." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the approaching Zexian structure gleaming against Europa's icy surface. "And if we're caught? Then we learn what the Zexians do to apes who reach too far above their station," Jackson replied grimly. "And the rest of the protocol continues without us." As the Prometheus closed in on its target, Sarah couldn't help but wonder how they had come to this point, secretly planning to attack a star to save their species from gradual extinction. But the alternative was to accept humanity's slow, inevitable relegation to the margins of their own world. "Better to die on our feet," she whispered to herself, recalling her grandfather's favorite phrase from the history books he'd loved, "than live on our knees." The ship's systems hummed as they prepared for docking. The first true act of human defiance was about to begin. The ascension. The Zexian data core pulsed with a blue-green light as Sarah's team worked to extract its contents. The Europa mining facility had proven less defended than expected. The Zexians so confident in their technological superiority that they hadn't considered the possibility of infiltration by a Category 3 species. 2 minutes until the shift change, Lieutenant Rice warned, monitoring the facility's internal communications from his position by the door. "We need to move." Dr. Kagoa's fingers moved rapidly across the interface she'd designed to communicate with Zexian systems. "Almost there. Their stellar mechanics database is massive. I'm only grabbing the sections on their home system and gravimetric theory." Sarah kept her eyes on the corridor outside, pulse rifle ready. The weapon was another Phoenix Protocol creation, human design enhanced with principles derived from studying Zexian technology. Its energy signature was calibrated to disrupt Zexian neural patterns without permanent damage. They weren't killers, not yet, anyway. "Got it," Kagoa announced, disconnecting the quantum storage device from the data core. The blue-green light stabilized as the system automatically repaired the evidence of intrusion. The team moved swiftly back through the maintenance corridors they used to enter, avoiding the main passages where Zexian workers would be transitioning between shifts. Sarah took point, leading them through the labyrinthine structure back toward their docking port. They were halfway there when the alarm sounded. "Not us," Rice said immediately, checking his scanner. "Environmental alert in processing section 7. Unrelated." But the alert meant movement. Zexian security personnel responding to the emergency. As they approached the final junction before the docking area, Sarah held up a closed fist, signaling the team to halt. Around the corner, she could hear the distinctive clicking speech of Zexians. She risked a quick glance and saw 3 security officers blocking their path to the Prometheus. "Options," she subvocalized into her comm. "Alternate route through the coolant maintenance shaft," Rice suggested, sending the path to her heads-up display. "Adds 4 minutes. Too long," Kagoa countered. "The ship's masking field only has 5 minutes of power left at full strength." Sarah made the decision. "We engage. Non-lethal. Rice, take right. Zhang, left. I'll center. Kagoa, stay back with the data." On her signal, they moved simultaneously into the corridor. The Zexian guards reacted quickly, but not quickly enough. The pulse rifles fired with a soft whump sound, sending focused energy that disrupted the aliens' neural patterns. 2 dropped immediately. The third managed to reach for its communication device before Zhang's second shot took it down. "Move," Sarah ordered, leading them past the unconscious guards to the airlock where the Prometheus waited. They'll be discovered in minutes. Once aboard, the ship detached smoothly from the facility and accelerated away, its revolutionary engines engaging to carry them beyond Zexian sensor range before the masking field failed. "Did we trigger any alarms?" Sarah asked as they reached a safe distance. "Negative," the ship's pilot reported. "As far as their systems show, a minor environmental issue occurred, and 3 guards are unaccounted for. By the time they piece it together, we'll be halfway to Mars." Dr. Kagawa was already at a workstation, examining the stolen data. "This is it," she said, her voice tight with excitement. "Detailed gravimetric analyses of their home star, orbital mechanics of their planet. Everything we need to calibrate the device." "Then it's possible?" Jackson asked, joining them on the bridge. "More than possible," Kagawa replied. "Their star, they call it Zex Talar, is particularly susceptible to the kind of manipulation I theorized. It's an older star with an unstable corona. With the right gravimetric pulse at the correct coordinates, we could trigger a coronal mass ejection 100 times more powerful than anything Earth has ever experienced." The implications hung in the air. Such an event wouldn't destroy the star, but it would devastate the Zexian homeworld, potentially killing billions, and certainly crippling their empire's center of power. "How long to build the device?" Sarah asked. "With this data, and the materials we've been gathering, 8 months, Kagawa estimated. But we'll need a delivery system. The device has to be positioned precisely relative to the star." "The Prometheus was just the beginning," Jackson said. "We've been developing a long-range vessel with enhanced versions of the same technology, the Phoenix itself. Over the next 6 months, humanity's secret resistance expanded its operations. Small teams infiltrated Zexian facilities throughout the solar system, gathering technology and intelligence while testing the aliens' vulnerabilities. The Phoenix Protocol evolved from a defensive contingency into an offensive strategy. All while, on the surface, humans continued to play the role of the compliant, primitive species." Sarah found herself in an increasingly complex position. By day, she attended diplomatic meetings with Zexian officials, maintaining the facade of cooperation even as the aliens expanded their control over Earth's resources. By night, she coordinated operations from the hidden lunar base, overseeing the development of technologies that might save humanity. The double life wore on her. Sometimes she caught herself almost believing the Zexian propaganda, that humans were indeed primitive compared to their ancient civilization, that perhaps managed integration was the best outcome possible. But then she would visit one of the temporary relocation zones in what had once been Central Africa, seeing thousands of displaced people living in prefabricated shelters while Zexian harvesters tore apart their ancestral lands, and her resolve would harden again. The construction of the gravitational pulse device, now codenamed Prometheus Flame, progressed ahead of schedule, thanks to breakthroughs derived from the stolen data. Dr. Kagawa and her team worked tirelessly, testing components in the shielded chambers beneath the lunar surface. "The principle is elegant," Kagawa explained during one briefing. "We create a focused gravimetric distortion that resonates with the star's own magnetic field, amplifying natural instabilities. The energy release will be directed primarily toward the Zexian homeworld." "And the effects?" Sarah asked. "A coronal mass ejection of unprecedented magnitude," Kagawa said clinically. "Their planetary shields would be overwhelmed. Surface temperatures would rise by hundreds of degrees. Electronics would fail. Their civilization would effectively collapse." Sarah studied the simulations playing across the holographic display. "Casualties?" Kagawa hesitated before answering. "If they can't evacuate in time, potentially billions." The room fell silent. The Phoenix Protocol had begun as a desperate measure to protect humanity from extinction. Somewhere along the way, it had transformed into something that could inflict the same fate on another species. "There has to be another option," Sarah said finally. "A demonstration, perhaps, Target an uninhabited planet in their system first. Show them what we're capable of without committing genocide. A warning shot. Jackson considered the idea. It could work, but it also eliminates the element of surprise. If they realize what we've developed, they might strike preemptively. Or they might finally recognize us as equals. Sarah countered, worthy of genuine negotiation rather than managed extinction. The debate continued among Phoenix Protocol leadership for weeks as the device neared completion. Some advocated for the immediate targeting of the Zexian homeworld, a decisive strike to cripple the Empire before they could respond. Others, like Sarah, pushed for a demonstration of power first, a chance for diplomacy backed by the threat of force. In the end, a compromise was reached. The Phoenix, humanity's first true deep space vessel, would carry 2 devices, one targeted for a demonstration on an uninhabited moon in the Zexian system, the other held in reserve for their homeworld if negotiations failed. As the launch date approached, Sarah found herself spending more time on the observation deck of Luna Base, watching the distant Earth gleam against the blackness of space. The blue-green planet seemed so fragile from this distance, so vulnerable to the whims of a species that had mastered the stars millennia ago. Having second thoughts, Admiral Jackson asked, joining her at the viewport. Not about the mission, Sarah replied, but about what comes after. The kind of species we'll become. Jackson was silent for a moment before responding. History is written by survivors, Commander. If we do nothing, there won't be human historians to debate our moral choices. And if we succeed, if we cripple or destroy an entire civilization to save our own, then we'll have to live with that weight, he said simply, and make sure it was worth the cost by building something better than what they would have left us. The day of launch arrived with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the lunar base. The Phoenix stood ready in its underground hangar, a sleek vessel that incorporated everything humanity had learned from studying Zexian technology, while pushing beyond it in ways the aliens had never explored. Sarah would command the mission, leading a crew of 24 scientists, soldiers, and engineers, the best minds the Phoenix Protocol had to offer. Dr. Kagawa would accompany them to oversee the device's deployment. As Sarah prepared to board, a communication came through from Earth, a priority message from the United Earth government's diplomatic corps. The Zexians have accelerated their timetable, Jackson informed her, his expression grim. They've announced the establishment of 5 new development zones covering most of South America and Eastern Europe. Relocation of human populations begins next week. Sarah felt cold clarity wash over her. How many people? Close to 1 billion. She nodded once, decision made. Then we proceed as planned. But the demonstration option remains primary. We give them a chance to recognize us as equals before we take more permanent action. The Phoenix launched silently, rising from the lunar surface, with barely a ripple in the gravimetric field, invisible to Zexian sensors. As Earth and then the entire solar system fell behind them, Sarah gazed at the holographic display showing their destination. Zextalar, the star that gave life to the species that had judged humanity unworthy of respect. They called us apes, she murmured to herself as the ship accelerated beyond conventional detection. Let's see if we can teach them a new word, equals. The reckoning. Zextalar hung in space before them, a massive orange-yellow star surrounded by the elaborate orbital infrastructure of an ancient civilization. The Phoenix remained at the edge of the system, its revolutionary masking technology concealing it from the extensive sensor networks that protected the Zexian homeworld. From this distance, Sarah could see why the Zexians had become so dominant in this arm of the galaxy. Their system contained not just one habitable world but 3, all connected by a web of space stations, transit systems, and defense platforms that spoke of technological advancement beyond anything humanity had achieved independently. Magnificent, Dr. Kagawa whispered beside her, genuine awe in her voice despite everything. And arrogant, Lieutenant Reyes added. Look at their defensive positioning. all focused outward, designed to repel conventional attacks from space. They'd never considered a threat could come from the star itself. Sarah studied the tactical displays as the Phoenix's passive sensors gathered data on the system, confirmed status of the primary target for demonstration. Zexminar, outermost moon of their second planet, the tactical officer reported, uninhabited except for automated mining operations, minimal Zexian presence, primarily robotic systems. And the device, ready for deployment. Dr. Kagawa confirmed, calibrated for a targeted coronal ejection that will impact the moon without affecting the inhabited planets. It will be unmistakable as a deliberate act, but cause minimal casualties. Sarah nodded, her decision made weeks ago, but heavy with each passing moment. Prepare the diplomatic package for transmission after the demonstration. Make sure the translation is perfect. They need to understand exactly what we're capable of and what we're asking for. Sarah considered their options. The mission parameters allowed for flexibility in timing, but every day they remained in the system increased the risk of detection. We proceed as planned, she decided, but we'll adjust the target. Instead of the outer moon, we'll target one of their defense platforms. Minimal crew, but unquestionably deliberate. The team recalibrated the device, aiming for a small coronal ejection that would disable a Zexian defense station positioned between the star and the homeworld. The station housed only a few dozen Zexians, primarily monitoring equipment. If they responded to the warning in time, even those lives could be spared. Device ready for deployment, Dr. Kagawa announced after several hours of recalculation. The modified gravimetric field will trigger a precise ejection in approximately 3 hours after activation. Deploy, Sarah ordered. The Phoenix released the device, a relatively small probe containing the gravimetric pulse generator. It moved silently toward its calculated position, using the same masking technology as the ship itself. Now we wait, Sarah said, her voice tight with tension. The 3 hours that followed were among the longest of Sarah's life. The bridge crew maintained a tense silence, each person aware of the historic significance of what they were about to witness. Humanity's first true strike against the empire that had dismissed them as primitive animals. When the time came, there was no dramatic countdown, no final button to push. The device had been programmed to activate automatically once in position. The first indication that it had worked came from the sensor array. Gravimetric distortion detected at the target coordinates, the science officer reported. Solar magnetic field responding. Coronal activity increasing exponentially. On the main display, they watched as a massive tendril of superheated plasma erupted from the star's surface, arcing through space with a speed and precision that defied natural phenomena. The targeted defense platform had only moments to detect the incoming ejection before it was engulfed. Defense platform offline. Tactical confirmed. Complete systems failure. Emergency broadcasts detected from surviving crew. Zexian response, Sarah asked. Confusion. Their system-wide communications show they're struggling to understand what happened. Multiple vessels moving to assist the platform. No indication they've identified the cause yet. Transmit the diplomatic package, Sarah ordered. All frequencies directed at their central command. The message went out. Humanity's ultimatum backed by the unmistakable demonstration of power. The bridge fell silent again as they waited for the response. It came faster than expected. Incoming transmission. Communications announced. Origin. Zexian Imperial Council. Sarah took a deep breath. On screen. The display shifted to show a Zexian she didn't recognize, older than most she had encountered, the patterns on its carapace indicating the highest levels of Imperial authority. When it spoke, the translator rendered its words with a formality that underscored the gravity of the moment. This is High Counselor Zex Terrell of the Imperial Council, the alien began. We have received your transmission and witnessed your attack on our defense installation. Explain yourselves, humans. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. I am Commander Sarah Chen of Earth. We have demonstrated a fraction of what we are capable of. The next target could be your homeworld itself. The High Counselor's four eyes blinked in their unsynchronized pattern. You threaten the Zexian Empire, a Category 3 species barely a century into space travel. Categories are meaningless now, Sarah replied. We've developed technology you overlooked. The ability to trigger precisely targeted coronal ejections. Your civilization exists at our mercy, just as you believed ours existed at yours. There was a long pause before the Zexian responded. Impossible. Our scientists assure me that such technology is beyond your capabilities. Your scientists have underestimated us from the beginning, Sarah countered. Just as your diplomats and your leaders have. We are not the primitive species you classified us as. We are your equals, and today, perhaps your superiors. She let that sink in before continuing. Our demands are simple: recognition of Earth's sovereignty, immediate cessation of all forced relocations, and genuine negotiations between our species. Failure to comply will result in a demonstration against your homeworld that will end your empire in a single day. The High Counselor's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation that the translator couldn't capture. You would commit genocide to avoid subjugation. The question hung in the air, its moral weight palpable. Sarah felt the eyes of her crew upon her, waiting for her answer. We would prefer to commit neither, she said finally. We are offering you what you never offered us. A choice. Recognize us as equals, or we will prove our worth in terms your empire understands. Hours of tense negotiation followed. The Zexian Imperial Council, faced with evidence of a threat they had never anticipated, vacillated between disbelief, rage, and reluctant consideration of human demands. Multiple times, advisors urged the High Counselor to order an immediate attack on Earth while they attempted to locate and destroy the Phoenix. Throughout it all, Sarah maintained her position, neither conceding nor escalating. The second device, the one calibrated to target the Zexian homeworld, remained aboard the Phoenix, a silent threat that underscored every exchange. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of diplomatic maneuvering, the High Counselor made an unprecedented announcement. The Zexian Empire would temporarily suspend its classification system, pending reassessment of human capabilities, halt all forced relocations on Earth, and enter into direct negotiations with human leadership on equal terms. This is not a surrender, the High Counselor clarified, but a reassessment in light of new information. That's all we've asked for, Sarah replied. A chance to determine our own future as equals, not as subjects. As the transmission ended, the bridge erupted in restrained celebration. They had achieved what had seemed impossible, forcing the most powerful empire in the galaxy to recognize humanity as peers without launching a devastating attack that would have made them no better than their oppressors. We should head home, Sarah told Jackson as the crew prepared for the return journey. There's much to do before formal negotiations begin. And the second device? He asked quietly. Sarah looked at the containment unit where the planet killer waited. Humanity's insurance policy against Zexian betrayal. We keep it. Trust requires verification until proven otherwise. The Phoenix began its journey back to Earth, leaving behind a star system in turmoil and an empire forced to reconsider its most fundamental assumptions. The news that would await them upon their return was beyond anything they could have imagined. The Zexian officials on Earth, shocked by the demonstration and fearful of human retaliation, had begun withdrawing from occupied territories, even before formal orders arrived from their homeworld. In the ship's observation lounge, Sarah found Dr. Kagawa staring at the dwindling image of Zexstellar. Do you think they'll honor the agreement? The scientist asked without turning. I think they'll calculate the risks and decide that acknowledging us as equals is less costly than the alternative, Sarah replied. And I think that's as close to genuine respect as we're likely to get from a species that spent millennia believing in their own superiority. We've changed everything, Kagawa murmured. The galaxy's hierarchy, the future of our species, and ourselves. Sarah considered this. They had indeed changed. developing technologies that could destroy civilizations, willing to hold billions of lives hostage to secure their freedom. The line between defender and destroyer had blurred. "We became what we needed to be," she said finally. "And now we need to be something else. Something that can build a future based on mutual respect rather than fear." Kagawa turned to face her. And if the Zexians renege on their promises? If they're simply buying time to develop defenses against our technology? Then they'll learn that humans are capable of both mercy and resolve. Sarah answered, "We gave them a choice today. What happens next depends on what they do with it." As Earth grew larger in their view screens, Sarah thought about the message they had sent to the galaxy. Humans would not be classified, controlled, or confined. They were not the apes the Zexians had dismissed them as, but neither were they the vengeful destroyers they could have become. They were something altogether new, a species that had faced extinction and found not just the means to survive, but the wisdom to wield that power with restraint. In the end, that might prove more significant than any weapon they had developed. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since the Zexians had arrived in Earth's orbit, humanity would face that future on its own terms, not as subjects, but as equals.